Hello, Khenpo. I am a third-year student who is majoring in applied psychology. Just now, you mentioned that having wealth or material possessions does not necessarily mean that someone will be truly happy. Last year, CCTV was also conducting a special series of interviews on this very topic. Are you happy? So, around the topic of happiness, I would like to ask you a question. What kind of person do you think is truly happy? And is the happiness we so often pursue the same kind of happiness as what we actually experience? Thank you.
Actually, as you are probably already aware, over the past few years, CCTV has been constantly asking the question, are you happy, in various diverse settings, which quickly became a widely discussed social topic. They asked the well-known CCTV, or China Central Television host Bai Yansong, are you happy? He said, I'm really not happy. Why am I still not feeling happy? Actually, happiness always requires a kind of quiet inner peace that comes from deep within ourselves. Because I don't yet have inner peace, I'm not happy. Later, I thought about it and realized that this simple statement is quite true and profound. Why is it that so many people now have material money and social power, but to be honest, their inner hearts still remain very restless and deeply troubled in this modern world? When they encounter various situations, they feel especially pained and troubled. Not only are their hearts unsettled, but they also feel a specific and especially strong sense of sadness, sorrow, and anxiety, experiencing these emotions deeply. As I mentioned earlier, I know a practitioner who is especially happy. Why is he happy? Because his heart is very calm. How does he maintain this calmness? Because he doesn't have excessive desires or pursuits. With the substantial wealth he possesses, he simply eats 3 ordinary meals each day and has no further personal ambitions. In this way, his heart remains calm. When his heart is calm and at peace, what we call happiness and joy will naturally follow as a result. Take Bhutan as an example, a small landlocked country located in the Himalayan mountains with a population of less than 1 million people. Why is it that people all over the world consider Bhutan to have the highest happiness index? The country's GDP is not very high. In fact, their overall economic output is quite modest. Despite this, Bhutan is often recognized for the happiness and well-being of its people. But each of them holds a certain unique Buddhist philosophy in its own way. In other words, their hearts are pure. On a daily basis, people chant sacred sutras, recite ancient mantras, perform various Buddhist rituals, and you can always hear much joyful laughter. I once noticed that the happiness index in places like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen is actually lower. By comparison, cities like Chongqing and Guizhou, for example, some of these places that aren't first-tier cities actually have a higher happiness index. What is the reason for this? It has something to do with the peace in people's hearts. If our hearts are completely and truly at peace, then it means we are also genuinely happy. In our Tibetan region, there are many, many people who are very happy. The reason for their happiness does not come from wealth. It should come from the peace within their hearts.
I'll address you as teacher now. First of all, thank you very much indeed for sharing so much with us this evening. We noticed that throughout your talk, you always had a smile on your face. You spoke with us so openly and confidently, and you stood the entire time. You didn't even drink any water. It must have been tiring. We are truly grateful to you. My question has troubled me for a very long time. It's something that I've been thinking about almost every single day. Sometimes I feel that, for example, today we're talking about the Buddhist view of economics. Sometimes I feel that much of what humanity as a whole studies and explores is all research confined within the boundaries of humanity. Take economics, for instance. We study economics, thinking about how to make money and how to explain certain economic phenomena. But in my view, I feel that economics is just some people thinking about how to make money from another group of people, and then how to use it. I feel that humanity has trapped itself within an internal environment without considering the Earth or other species. We've ignored other species. On Earth, other species hold the same status as humans. Yet we've nearly destroyed other species and the entire Earth's environment, but we still tend to focus more on issues within humanity itself. That's my thought. I wanted to ask for your opinion.
Yes, in my opinion, my view is fundamentally and essentially the same as yours. Why do I say this? Well, the reason is quite simple. because indeed, when carefully analyzing certain important aspects of the Buddhist perspective on economics, perhaps for those of you who are present here today, you will also gradually come to understand this important principle in the future. Why do I say this? Well, right now, humans are generally only acting for themselves or for a certain group of living beings. And for their own interests, they've begun to recklessly destroy the external environment. At the same time, they also trample on other species and various forms of life without mercy. This reminds me, for example, of the distant and painful past about 400 years ago, reflecting the dark and tragic stories of oppressed African slaves. You all well know that right now, the current president of the United States is actually black. In a certain sense, we could say it has already achieved a very high level of social ideals and aspirations regarding peace in society. But as for what life was actually like for black people in the past, everyone probably already has some idea. From 1451 to 1870, for about 420 years, during all those long and painful years, so-called black people unfortunately became lifelong slaves, constantly serving their wealthy white masters and owners. Some historical accounts say that from Africa to the Americas, on the ships, those who were thrown overboard, some were terribly sick and some were totally unable to work. The total recorded number cruelly thrown into the deep sea, some wise historical people say, was approximately 150 million. Some say it was only 100 million, while some say nearly 200 million. Over more than 400 years, such brutal and inhumane acts of humans against other fellow humans took place. Now we have entered the 21st century, and the concept of trampling on other humans has changed to some extent. But now, for the sake of a group of humans, every day we are, as I just mentioned, committing a vast slaughter in the animal world, quite similar to what happened in World War II. Nowadays, precious mineral resources are being constantly mined and heavily developed every day. But for future generations, we are basically leaving behind only very few remaining valuable essential resources currently available today. This is the result of the ever-expanding desires of a tiny minority of people. Such excessive desires are all for their own possession and for their personal benefit and advantage. Many of our actions, in fact, can truly and honestly be said to be things that we should genuinely be ashamed of before both heaven and earth. Therefore, when the concept of world peace reaches a certain level, you will realize that harmony is needed in relationships between people. Harmony is also needed in the relationship between humans and animals. Harmony is also needed in the relationship between humans and nature. So what does this require? It's just as is taught in Buddhism. A person should not have in their possession too much wealth, material possessions, and resources in their life. A person must not harm any living being. Personally, it is not just because I am a Buddhist that I have a special and sincere respect for Buddhism. It is because when we talk about realizing various important concepts of world peace, there are some practical suggestions and profound theories found in traditional Buddhism. So what this particular student just said is indeed correct and well worth considering. Everyone should try to possess and control less wealth and resources themselves and leave more for all of humanity and the entire world. At the same time, the excessive, massive waste of natural resources nowadays is also truly alarming. So many of the important and urgent things that need to be done now should finally be entrusted to the next generation of young people. Those of you present here today can be said to be the people of the 21st century, and I believe that all the tasks of the 21st century rest on the shoulders of these young people. As for us, I once heard a teaching from a great master. He said that those who are over 50, 60, or 70 years old are considered people of the 20th century. We will soon be saying goodbye and leaving this world. You young people, the 21st century indeed belongs to you. What kind of world you create in the future is in your hands.
Master, hello. I have a question about the Buddhist view on economics. I believe the economic perspective shouldn't focus on making money, but on how one manages it, the concepts and principles behind it. So as for the economic perspective, I want to ask you a question. You see, nowadays in many temples, in front of every Buddha or Bodhisattva, there is always a box called a merit box. Among those who come, there are many business people or people seeking favors from the Buddha. They will generously donate substantial sums of money. At this time, each temple receives a large amount of funds. My question is, how do they handle these funds? Because this involves the true economic perspective of Buddhism. There are also people responsible for the maintenance of the temples. That is, kind donors will contribute and so on. The government or state will also help maintain. So I wonder, how do they handle surplus funds? Thank you, teacher.
I think the so-called economic perspective actually covers a rather wide range of important social topics. The basic principles we just discussed can also be successfully used to explain this issue from a different angle. What you mentioned is actually not necessarily the economic perspective of Buddhism, but the issue of how donation boxes are handled in Buddhist temples can indeed involve some economic aspects as well. Actually, this issue is relatively simple. In the temple where I reside, there are no donation boxes. So for me personally, this question is actually still quite relatively easy to honestly answer. Some temples I have visited do indeed have donation boxes. But as for these donation boxes, according to the specific requirements in the Buddhist scriptures, if a donation box is placed in front of a Buddha statue, it must be used to create Buddha statues or to respectfully offer lamps, flowers, or water to the Buddha. Monks or ordained people are not allowed to use it for themselves. If they do, it would violate the precepts. It is even more strictly forbidden for so-called government officials or other lay people, such as entrepreneurs, to use it. If lay people use it, then the karmic consequences are even more severe. Of course, nowadays we live in a time where good and bad are all mixed together. Sometimes the monastery itself may also find itself in a very awkward situation, one that is difficult to manage. This happens because it does not possess any real authority, and therefore all the finances and monetary matters within the monastery may already be controlled by certain local tourism bureaus or various other large private commercial property developers instead. If they are in control, then whether it's selling tickets or managing the donation boxes, everything is actually being operated by certain individuals behind the scenes, and they are the ones benefiting from it. On the surface, it looks like a donation box is placed in front of the Buddha statue, but in reality, this money is not actually used for the Buddha statue. Nor is it ever used within the monastery itself. Instead, it is very likely spent in other departments or areas outside the monastery. In fact, this is actually completely contrary to the fundamental teachings of Buddhism. In Buddhism, for example, if there are 3 Buddha statues, then the donation box in front of the central Buddha statue should be used for gilding and making offerings to that specific statue. It cannot be used for other Buddha statues, nor can it be used for printing scriptures. It cannot be used to support monks. Monks are not allowed to use money from the donation box by the Buddha statue. Doing so is forbidden and breaks the precepts. However, nowadays, in fact, many temples are probably forced into this situation. Some do not understand the precepts, and there are various circumstances, so we can't say all donation boxes are unreasonable. I've found that some temples manage their donation boxes very strictly. But there are also some temples in the surrounding area. As mentioned in recent news reports, some business professionals have formally taken over temples under contract. They are responsible for selling all the tickets, but the monks inside are managed by themselves. This situation represents another way of developing the Buddhist economy in modern times in the 21st century.
Master, hello. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank you for coming here to give a lecture at our Central University of Finance and Economics. Most of the people present here today are young people. I would like to ask a question regarding the relationship between young people and Buddhism, because actually in the first 20 or even 30 years of our lives, at the very least, we are all constantly trying to prove to the world how brave and capable we are. Many people tirelessly pursue so-called success or some kind of fleeting fame. These things all feel like a restless kind of outward rush. But I think the most truly wonderful thing about Buddhism may be that it teaches us to return inward. As you said, it gives people a sense of happiness because it brings peace and tranquility to the heart. But what immediately comes to mind is, for example, when I was in my first year of high school, I heard an example very early on that really surprised me at the time. There was a student from Peking University whose parents worked very hard to raise him, but after he graduated, he became a monk. This news caused quite a stir in society at the time. I also thought this student was very courageous, that he was able to pursue his own happiness. But as I've grown older, I feel that young people also have their own responsibilities. His parents raised him, and society also invested some resources and financial costs in him. Now, I might think that at the very least, he should work steadily and earn money responsibly for about 10 years first. He should first secure his parents' retirement funds and then go pursue his own happiness. What do you personally think about young people's drive to break out into the world, especially compared to the Buddhist idea of being indifferent to worldly competition? Thank you very much.
Just now, that student said, I don't drink tea, but I've actually been drinking water. The question that this student just raised is actually quite notable. In fact, the news about a student from Peking University who became a monk at a nearby temple is quite well known, and many people in the university community have heard about it. Many people know about it, and actually it's not just this case. At Larunga, there are many from Peking University and Tsinghua University, and even a few from your University of Finance and Economics who have become monks over there. There are quite a few. In my view, everyone's personal choices in life are often truly and actually quite different. Everyone's values are different as well. Even looking back in history, there have been many notable kings, including some important kings from the ancient Han region, also chose to become monks in the end. There are quite a lot of such cases. Therefore, becoming a dedicated monk, according to some profound classical Buddhist teachings that we have discussed, as stated in the teachings of Master Wrongdoing of the Chan school in Han region, is not an act of being unfilial to one's parents. On the surface, it may simply seem that by becoming a monk, one is giving up a lot of important worldly things. But in reality, it is because they are seeking a certain truth. They are searching for a different direction from the one in which everyone else is busying themselves in life. They will find another kind of happiness in their own unique way. For example, when some college students become monks, their parents are strongly opposed at first. But later, the parents also eventually decide to become monastics, and after that, their entire family lives very happily, and they never ever argue again. Moreover, in the monastery, it is even more peaceful and joyful. There are many such cases, so we shouldn't think that in any way, when intellectuals or highly educated people become monks, it seems as if they made the wrong choice or that they are completely unfilial. In fact, nowadays, most people are primarily driven by a certain ideology or education. They think this is the only way, without considering other possibilities at all. But our lives should be multifaceted, not just heading in a single direction. The paths in our lives should be open in all directions. We can choose from many different and unique roads. That's why so many young people in our fast-paced modern society are constantly striving for their own reputation and personal success. But in the process of striving for these goals, you also need to be very careful. If you're not careful, if you lack great courage and true perseverance, you might easily fall along the difficult way. But when you do inevitably fall, you must have the strong spirit to get back up again. So Buddhism is not just about initially seeking some form of simple peace in a quiet place, or seeking tranquility and giving everything up. Actually, that's not the case. Buddhism is just like the secular world. In the beginning, you must strive to seek. You must work hard to practice, to pursue knowledge diligently. When you reach the highest level at that point, you perceive everything as emptiness. You see through it all. But Buddhism never says that from the very beginning. Like when you're in first grade, you see through everything. That's not how it is. At the start, Buddhism teaches you to do good deeds, understand the truth, and aspire to learn, and so on. When you reach the highest level at that point, you have completely seen through everything. Many people haven't analyzed the different levels within Buddhism. When Buddhism is mentioned, it seems everything in Buddhism is empty, that it's all about seeing through things, but that's not the case. Buddhism progresses step by step, and when you reach the highest level, it's like when physicists talk about subatomic quarks and atomic nuclei at the most very fundamental microscopic level. It's a very detailed method of analysis. At the very beginning, they didn't analyze things this way either. They also fully acknowledged the existence of material phenomena in the world today. Buddhism also fully acknowledges and recognizes our current life, including the various relationships between men and women, and so on. None of these things require you to see through everything completely. So, in our pursuit of the truth of life, I think that drawing on some of the spirit and wisdom of Buddhism can be very helpful for our own existence.
Hello, Master. I'm a freshman, currently majoring in statistics. I have a question. In my hometown, Huangmei in Hubei province, there's a saying, among the 5 patriarchs in the world, Huangmei has 2. We have the 4th patriarch temple and the 5th patriarch temple in our area. You could say that Buddhist culture in our region has a rather long history. But from what I've seen, at the 5th patriarch temple, there is currently a large amount of capital being invested in the temple. They keep renovating and restoring the temple over and over. I just went back to see it earlier this year. I noticed that the current state of the temple is now completely different from how it was when I was a child. It no longer has what a temple is supposed to have, that simple, serene atmosphere that makes it feel like a peaceful and ancient place. Instead, it now feels much more modernized and has unfortunately lost much of its original character and charm. Inside, there is the true body hall of the 5th Patriarch Master. However, now we can no longer enter it as we once could. I think people still go to Wuzu Temple to worship Buddha, mainly because of its well-known reputation and historical significance. Maybe it's just that more people are interested in seeing these things, but the temple actually changes. I don't really know for what particular reason, but they just don't let us see these things. Instead, they focus on showing us some external forms. I want to know now, what is the true essence of what the temples are pursuing today? When we go to the temples to worship Buddha now, I think maybe nowadays, most visitors are only looking for material blessings, and it's mostly the older generation, like grandpas and grandmas who go to the temple to sincerely worship Buddha. It's rare to see many young people who admire Buddhism and regularly go to temples. So when we often go to temples, what is it that people today are really seeking in their hearts? When they go to the temple to worship Buddha, what are they hoping to gain? I would like to know your opinion. Thank you very much.
What do you want to gain when you go to a temple? What did you want to gain when you went to the temple? I think the question is like this. I've also been to the famous Wuzu temple before. In the history of Chan Buddhism, it should certainly be said that Wuzu temple is a very blessed and sacred place. Although the true body relics throughout many different turbulent periods of history, due to various radical movements that unfortunately brought severe destruction to the entire tradition of Buddhism, I'm afraid the true body relics no longer truly exist, but it is indeed a peaceful and very good place. But why have so many ancient temples in China now become somewhat like popular tourist attractions? This is undoubtedly somewhat related to the rapid trends of the current modern economic society. What is the true primary function of a temple? It is to actively teach and thoroughly expound the profound and sacred Dharma. If there is no teaching of the Dharma in the temple, it's very hard to attract young people. Young people are not like the elderly. Elderly people are often content just to pay respects to the Buddha and pray earnestly to the compassionate bodhisattvas for personal blessings. But in this modern era, where many people's inner sense of separation and distinction is growing stronger, I think what young people need even more is the guidance of Buddhism. Therefore, we especially hope that in Han Chinese Buddhist temples, there will be some eminent monks and great teachers who continuously expound the Dharma to everyone. If there are Dharma teachings available, then the actual truths of Buddhism can truly be said to be absolutely genuine. Moreover, they bring substantial benefits to our lives and our existence, as well as to our work. Therefore, in Tibetan Buddhism, the long-standing tradition of cultivating individual talent has always been carefully upheld. Up to now, in the monasteries, a monastic's formal training in Buddhist teachings typically lasts for about 20 years, and this has always been and remains the case. In this way, no matter which particular monastery you go to in the entire Tibetan region, there are always some people giving Dharma teachings. Some monastics from certain monasteries travel to various places to teach the Dharma, and there are quite a lot of such cases. By comparison, in Han regions, this is not particularly common nowadays. Therefore, we hope that not only will many people come to the temple to burn incense and pay respects to the Buddha, planting virtuous roots in their mental continuum, which is also very good, but more importantly, some Buddhist teachers and some lay practitioners should share and spread the important teachings of Buddhism to all people. In this way, many devoted men and women can truly have their needs met. Otherwise, in today's industrial society, or rather in today's society, it should be said that actually this issue is becoming increasingly apparent. So in the future, we may need to work together on this.
I'm a freshman at the School of Taxation. You just mentioned the issue of inner peace. We ordinary people often experience this. Even when we're in a quiet environment alone, our minds seem to have their own voice and keep talking to us restlessly and endlessly, and it can even significantly affect our sleep. Before going to sleep at night, it keeps talking to itself nonstop. In psychology, there's a term for this. It's called mental chatter. When I try to get rid of this situation myself, I chose to practice Vipassana, but when I was doing Vipassana, I felt a very strong resistance in my body. May I ask, how can we truly make our minds peaceful and calm so that we are able to get rid of this kind of meaningless self-talk that often troubles us and keeps us from feeling at ease? I also have another question I would like to ask, which is not related to the previous topic. I once read in Plato's The Republic, and as I recall, it was mentioned that he said, for example, an ordinary individual person makes a lot of money, but in the process, he did some things that were perhaps not so good. Then he made a lot of money. Although he lives a good life, he feels guilty. At this point, he eventually turns to religion for guidance. In Western religions, this might be called confession or atonement, or in Buddhism, there might be similar spiritual practices designed to purify the mind and soul. And because of these acts of confession, he finds inner relief. But in this case, it feels very unfair. Many people who live in poverty, unfortunately, continue to live in poverty. Meanwhile, the person who did bad things ended up making a lot of money. But in the end, they end up living a good life and also find inner relief. Doesn't religion then give them a rather unfair and unequal opportunity for confession? What do you personally think about this topic? Thank you.
I think your first question should be, if we want to truly find inner peace, first in Buddhism, there is what is called the Vairocana 7-point sitting posture. The Vairocana 7-point sitting posture is considered the most important posture in all of Buddhism. For example, the two hands should form the dhyana mudra. Both eyes should gaze directly and steadily into the empty space ahead. The very tip of the tongue gently touches the upper palate. Your spine, as well as your whole body, should sit upright. This is the posture of many Buddha statues, the Vairocana 7-point posture. This 7-point posture actually resembles the shape of the Egyptian pyramids. In fact, the Egyptian pyramids, when different modern research scientists analyze them through archaeology, they are believed to possess a truly special ability to sustain all living things. So, when we get up in the morning or before we go to bed at night, if we sit in this standard meditative posture and gradually calm our minds, it brings tremendous transformative benefits. If your sitting posture is incorrect, it won't truly benefit your subsequent mental adjustment. That's why we must firmly adopt this precisely aligned kind of posture for productive meditation practice to achieve purification of the mind. The second question, for example, suppose an individual commits a wrongdoing first, and later, after committing the unwholesome deed, he sincerely repents to clear away those karmic obstacles. But in reality, we need to analyze the degree of his repentance or the severity of his wrongdoing. If the bad thing he did wasn't very serious, and later his own act of heartfelt repentance was quite sincere, then in Buddhism, it can be said in a certain way that this purifies the spirit as well. For example, if you committed some minor violations, but later you utilized a significant amount of wealth, for example, to make amends. and the merit you accumulated surpassed the sins you previously committed. Then, in accordance with Buddhism, perhaps your life can once again return to peace. But if the sin you committed is quite serious and you only make a superficial confession, maybe in this lifetime you won't necessarily experience any obvious consequences, but in your future lives you will definitely and truly endure immense suffering. For example, if someone kills another person, that is, takes another's life, for such a crime, merely doing a good deed or verbally expressing repentance, it is absolutely impossible to purify it in any way. If we commit a minor wrongdoing and we spare someone or perform a great deal of good deeds, then the situation is different. Then it can offset, or even the merit can surpass the wrongdoing. So these scholars and philosophers of the past, what they referred to as repentance in the face of religion, I believe they were actually referring to the former situation, not the latter one.
Khenpo, hello. I would like to ask you, first, I believe that existence is reasonable, including the lady who just sat next to me who had a rather profound insight. I still think that existence is reasonable. What is your view on this perspective? Second, how do you think religion will develop in the future? Will there be a trend toward universal religiosity, meaning everyone will have some kind of faith, but not necessarily believe in a specific God? Thank you.
I believe Buddhism has extremely profound methods of observation and inquiry which are practiced through wisdom. In the realm of this kind of deep inner observation, in fact, what we ordinarily consider to be reasonable or simply possible can all be gradually refuted. As I mentioned earlier, Buddhism has many levels, and when we look at the highest level, we might think, for example, that this solid building in front of us is merely something stationary. But in reality, it is not still even for a single moment. It is always in a state of constant motion. We might simply think it can have a fixed lifespan of 50 years without change, believing that this is possible. But if we take time to observe it in a more subtle or microscopic way with careful attention, we find its so-called lifespan changes in the blinking of an instant from moment to moment. In this way, when we look at a relatively profound level in Buddhism, all material phenomena in the world as we ordinarily see them are actually revealed to be illusions of our own perception. If you carefully observe with wisdom what you see with your eyes and believe to be existent, you will find that in fact you have never really actually seen it at all. And what you do see are all made up of incredibly tiny, minuscule particles. Physicists also agree with that. Even the most minute, almost unimaginably small molecules of each tiny particle cannot be seen by my eye consciousness. So, when we do not observe more deeply in this dreamlike and illusory state in the midst of people's confused perceptions, we also acknowledge that all things in the world can be reasonable or unreasonable. Unreasonable means, for example, a river flowing backwards against its nature, or the sun moving from west to east in the opposite direction. These all go against the natural laws, but on the surface, the things in front of us can seem reasonable and can exist. But in fact, from a much deeper Buddhist perspective, what we now see, hear, smell, and taste are all considered to be unreasonable, unreal, unreliable, and ultimately untrustworthy. Actually, it should be said that religion, in general, ought to be understood as covering a rather broad and extensive scope. There are 4 major religions, 5 major religions, and so on in the world. Among them, as for Buddhism, I believe that regardless of what various religious or anti-religious movements arise in the world, in fact, what Buddhism teaches is an education in truth and wisdom. This education in wisdom will never be eliminated or destroyed by human history or by certain movements, because what it speaks of is the true nature and truth of all things in the universe. Truth cannot be destroyed. Therefore, any religion, if it is a true religion, it will speak to the truth of all material and sentient worlds, expressing the reality that exists within both physical matter and conscious beings. If it cannot fully explain the truth of all things, and only promotes certain ideas or perspectives to the public in order to reflect its own values and beliefs, then it does not truly fulfill its purpose. Then it is merely a sect, not a complete religion.
Master, hello. I would like to ask about the issue of religious belief, because 80 to 90% of Americans have religious beliefs. At first, I always thought religion was just a place to seek spiritual comfort, but I found out that's not the case. For example, in America, some highly educated intellectuals and university professors all have their own religious beliefs, whereas in China, that's not the case. In China, very few people have their own religious beliefs. I'd like to ask you, how do you view the relationship between religious belief and life? Thank you.
Last year, we attended a World Youth Buddhist Symposium in Hong Kong with many participants from different countries and backgrounds. Among them, there was a Chinese girl studying at Harvard University at the time pursuing her studies. She said that after she went to the United States, many students and teachers had religious beliefs of various kinds. She didn't have any religious belief at all back then, and others saw her as a weirdo in that environment. They said to her, "Since you don't even have a religious belief, why are you studying at Harvard?" What she said made me reflect deeply for a long time after hearing it. Nowadays, many college students and teachers think that having no religious belief is normal in modern society these days. But from my personal opinion and perspective based on my experience, people should have some kind of belief in their lives to guide them. Some people now think that not believing in anything is a sign of their own intelligence. In fact, not having any belief should be seen as lacking wisdom. To be honest, no matter how much your environment restricts you in various ways or pressures you, you should still have some kind of belief to guide you. That is actually the best way to uphold the moral bottom line in your life as a person living in society. Take the United States, for example. Over 95% of people there have some form of faith, including the president. When the President of the United States gave a speech at Tsinghua University at that time, he said, over 95% of Americans have religious beliefs or faith. With religious faith, a person's sense of morality is accompanied by a sense of restraint. If you don't have religious faith, in fact, not believing is also a kind of belief. In reality, if you don't believe in anyone else, it simply means you really believe in yourself. But is believing in yourself really that reliable? Actually, it's not. Today, I might like someone, but after a while, I might not like them anymore. Today, I like these clothes, but in a couple of days, I might not like them anymore. So this so-called believing in yourself is really just deceiving yourselves over and over again without realizing it. Therefore, I hope that as young people, maybe because of your parents, family, or friends around you, and their influence on you, it was understandable if you didn't have faith before. But in the future, you should seek some kind of faith. It should be of great help to one's life and personal growth in meaningful ways. When you reach the point where life is around 40 or 50 years old, or even 60 years old, when looking back on one's life, there used to be a belief that this reflection actually did not harm your life. In fact, it often brings a sense of belonging and provides comfort and solace.
Hello, Rinpoche. I have a question for you about something I've been thinking. Thangka paintings, Buddha statues, and other artifacts are all handmade. So can these handcrafted artifacts truly be regarded as equivalent to the bodhisattvas and Buddhas they represent? If they cannot be considered equivalent when people worship these man-made objects, is there actually any real benefit and blessing from them? If I worship an image or representation of a certain bodhisattva, can that bodhisattva actually know that I am worshiping them? That is simply my question.
In fact, whether it's a thangka or a statue in Tibetan tradition, these are not just imagined or fabricated by a single person or ordinary people without any basis or guidance from authentic sources. They are not arbitrary inventions or fabrications conjured out of thin air. It's not like that. There should be a solid and reliable basis for them, whether in the long and rich history of Buddhism or in the sacred scriptures of various religions. There are always certain standards and requirements. Moreover, if we create Buddha statues in accordance with the proper and established principles, there is actually immense and profound merit in doing so. Just to give one example, when we sincerely make vows in front of Buddha statues ourselves, when we go before Buddha statues to seek blessings, then naturally, through their response to our sincere devotion and prayers, we receive the genuine protection and blessings they bestow upon us with compassion and grace. So, I think although it may seem like something man-made on the surface, in reality, there are some very profound causes and conditions at work here beyond what we can see, just like any monument in the world that holds deeper meaning. It also has its own significant symbolic meaning and important historical value indeed. In the same way, Buddha and Bodhisattva statues truly possess some inconceivable and subtle blessings as well. Just like medicine in the world, it has its own unique medicinal healing properties. Similarly, Buddha images, sacred mantras, and any heartfelt aspiration in the world, in fact their forms, each of which is unique and meaningful, also have their own special power and blessings that are believed to influence and benefit those who recognize them.
Our time is up for now. Thank you for joining us. Let us once again give a warm round of applause to thank the great Khenpo.